Let's see. Yeah, all right. Well, hey, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we're always really excited to have our good friend Harlan Coben back with us, albeit virtually, to discuss his brand new book, The Match. And Harlan was kind enough to sign a bunch of books for us, as always. So there. And I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field on Facebook and YouTube, should you wish to purchase one. And also, I'll be monitoring that. So if you have questions for Harlan, go ahead and put them in as they occur to you throughout the hour, and I'll be happy to ask anything. So, Barbara, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Notice that Patrick's copy is all shiny, but that's because we put a library cover on it to protect it. Because this is really a gorgeous cover, Harlan, isn't it? It's so colorful.
Yeah, it's an interesting cover. I don't know. It's always funny. Online, they always like the British ones, which are always more boring and staid to me, but they're more obvious. I thought this is sort of, the DNA, the match being DNA. So I thought it fit. I'm not really much of a graphic designer, though, so
Well,
I don't know what I like.
Space age, Art Deco kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, it's always interesting with covers. It's like when they send it to me, I always try to react immediately and then not change my mind because, some people in the store, right? They go into your store and they see it. They're not spending 20 minutes staring at it, trying to figure out all the nuance. They're either picking it up or they're moving on. So I'm like, what's my immediate reaction? Is my immediate reaction good or bad, and forget everything else?
And it's really changed now that we have all this digital stuff, because the covers, a lot of them are really designed to look great as JPEGs more than they are to look terrific on books. But I happened to look at Harlan's British edition cover earlier today, and he's right, they are wildly different.
Yeah, always. And of course, every country does different ones, and people ask why. And it's usually because each country thinks that they know their market, which may be true to some degree. And also each country is convinced that their cover is much, much better than everybody else's. Part of it is that they're right, and part of it is everyone wants to justify their job. So if they're just taking the cover from somebody else, people are losing their jobs. So it's always fun to see when they come in how each country interprets the jacket. I just saw the jacket for Germany, and it's like a shot from above of a house. It's really cool. I don't even know how to describe it other than that right now. But it was very completely different, but also kind of eerie and cool.
Well, Harlan obviously is a hugely successful #1 internationally selling best author, which is why we're having this cover discussion. And sometimes other countries change the titles too, but is this one stuck with being The Match throughout, Harlan?
No. In fact, the German was just changed to something really long and and they always ask my permission. I'm always like, whatever you want to do. I don't know. If it doesn't work in your country, that's their job. So they change them all the time into something else. The French do also. They seem to always change it. But as long as it's selling well, then I'll say okay. But if it doesn't sell well, then I blame them for changing the title. So it's a win-win for me.
Well, sometimes it confuses our customers when they see other titles and other covers and they think, Lord, it's another book. But in fact...
Well, in Germany, one time they actually, because I guess it must be an English word, for Play Dead, they used the title Honeymoon, which I guess is also a German word. And so everybody thought I had a book called Honeymoon that I hadn't released here. So.
Which annoys your local fans. Well, Harlan has won the Edgar, Seamus, and Anthony Awards, among all of his other honors. And many of his books, in fact, an increasing number, almost a tsunami, have been developed into Netflix originals. But before we talk about The Match, Harlan has an exciting announcement that came his way today about another character in another upcoming series. What's that, Harlan?
For those who like the young adult series, the Mickey Bolitar series, we are making Mickey Bolitar was just greenlit by Amazon Prime to be a series. We're filming it here in New Jersey. Actually, we filmed it. We made a pilot of it. We filmed it in my actual high school, which is where I placed the book. I then changed the name to Castleton High School from Livingston High School. But we're filmed right here in New Jersey. 8 episodes on Amazon Prime. So Mickey Bolitar will be coming to a streaming, however you watch it on your computer or your TV set soon. We'll start filming it probably this summer. Again, we already filmed the pilot. It's a wonderful young cast. These are some unbelievably talented kids who play Mickey, Spoon, and Ema, especially for those characters. And because of rights, Myron can't appear in it. Myron has a small part in the series for those who have read the books. So instead, we'll have his sister, Shira Bolitar, who's played by the wonderful actress Constance Zimmer. If you look up Constance, you know her work. You saw her in Entourage and LA Law and a bunch of. She's on Unreal. I think right now she's on the show on is it Big Sky. Is that what the C.J. Bach show on ABC is? So she's a wonderful actress, and she'll be playing the aunt, and very excited about it. It should be a lot of fun, and I'll be able to be on set quite a bit because we're filming in my backyard.
This is surreal for me. Surreal, I should say, because Harlan and I were actually sitting together in a coffee shop when negotiations for his very first movie came along with a French company. And, you know, God, that was back in the 90s, wasn't it?
It was Tell No One, the year 2000. I remember I was sitting there while I was getting the phone calls and studios were bidding on it. And at that time, I was not a New York Times bestseller. I would be for the first time a few weeks later. And that kind of money and that sort of stuff really was... It was a stunning day, and it was fun to have you with me, offering moral support, and as a friend who's been with me in the old days too. You know, one of the things that people forget, and in this day and age where every success has to be instantaneous, was that my first New York Times bestseller, which was Tell No One, was my 10th novel. It didn't happen overnight or anything like that, and it's great having you there for a lot of that. So thank you. Again.
Well, you're entirely welcome.
22 years ago, though. 22 years ago. Yeah.
I'll never forget Harlan. Every time he answered the phone, his eyes got bigger and he got a more incredulous look on his face, and I could see him going, "How much?" It was really fun to watch it. It went on over a couple of hours. But, you know, Harlan's right. He started out, interestingly, as a paperback original author. And, you know, not everybody is an overnight success. And it's harder today to do that, isn't it, Harlan?
It is. I mean, I joke that the first Myron Bolitar book, Deal Breaker, which was a paperback original, my advance was $5,000 on it. And I don't want to brag, but by the time the fourth Myron Bolitar came out, I was up to $6,000. So overnight success, you know, so it didn't happen fast. In those days, they would build authors slower. And one of the other things that's sort of interesting is we were also more naive back then because we didn't have Amazon rankings and internet and Nielsen book scan and all that. So I had no idea what a pimple on the ass of publishing I really was. I was being published by Dell, which was a major publishing house, Bentham Doubleday Dell. I knew I was only in paperback, but they were in most bookstores, had a couple of copies, and I thought I was the cat's ass. I thought I was doing great. If I had known the odds back then of making the next step, I probably would have committed suicide or done something weird or tried changing everything up right away. But I didn't. I thought I was doing fine. And so that I encourage writers to be a little naive. Just get your head back down and write the next one. Stop checking your Amazon rankings. Stop checking your Twitter likes and your Instagram. None of that was around. I don't want to sound like an old man talking on a horse and buggy, but I actually still think all that social media stuff is more or less irrelevant. Just keep writing the best book you can.
Well, we are older, Harlan, than we were when all this started. You know, it's interesting. I've had this same conversation with Mark Rainey, who's about to go big time, you know, with a big movie. And his Brain Man was a paperback original too, you know, and we were right there and, you know, walked along. And that's one of the best things about 32 years of doing this is how many careers we've actually walked the entire distance with the author, you know, read them in real time, hosted them in real time. And it's hard for fans coming in today to recognize what a long curve that was. So you talked about New Jersey. In fact, Harlan, I thought he had a view of the Hudson behind him, but he tells me it's just lights. Sorry, across the Hudson.
These sort of Christmassy tree lights for some reason on here, and so they're reflecting strangely, but that's just my backyard, which is pretty empty.
It's great. Well, I have to admit, Harlan, that basically all I know about New Jersey outside of your books is driving up the left side of the Hudson from Newark, and you know, in that direction. And so I looked up because I forgot the Ramapo Valley.
That's Ramapo.
Yeah.
At least
Is it
that's how
Ramapo?
we probably pronounced it incorrectly, but we pronounce it Ramapo.
Okay. I didn't even know there were mountains in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that they are an offshoot of the Appalachians, true?
It is. They are part of the Appalachians. People don't realize that New Jersey has the Appalachians and the Ramapo Mountains. Ramapo was a Native American tribe. It's very with weird. Some people have called them. I think it's considered now a slur. They were known as, when I was a kid, the Jackson Whites.
Yep.
The people who did not know exactly were they Native American or Hessian or the different tribes here. There's been a lot of controversy about them. A lot of violence and a lot of living completely. Still to this day, they live in those mountains remotely. I've discussed this in a number of books because I find it utterly fascinating. And kids growing up in this area were told sort of boogeyman stories about it. And hopefully now it's getting a lot better. But yeah, the mountains are right here. It's literally 5 miles up the road from where I am.
And they spill over into New York, right?
Yep.
Because it's a very big park. And you're right. I looked up Jackson Whites, a group of mixed breed persons who are held to have descended from the amalgamated issue of renegades, outlaws, and horrors of various colors. I love that. I mean, what did
nobody knows. I would think with DNA today you would know. But I've heard every sort of rumor that they surrendered during the Revolutionary War and started camping up there and then mixed in with the native people. No one seems to really know. Groups that were just ended up in those mountains up there.
So Wilde, the boy from the woods, comes out of these mountains having been, we have to find out. You read The Boy from the Woods, and the match is revisiting Wilde. And years ago, Harlan, talk about years ago, back in the 80s, Aaron Elkins wrote a book called The Dark Place, and it was set in the Olympic forest in Washington. And the young boy who emerged from the forest was actually the last of his tribe, so to speak. He was a Native American. It was a really interesting story, completely different from yours. He was more like Tarzan, because he was completely cut off from all contemporary civilization and had to learn. What was your inspiration for Wilde and The Boy from the Woods?
Well, I was walking. I took a hike through the Ramapo Mountains with my family, and I hate hiking. I don't get it. It's hiking through the woods. I mean, there's a tree, and then there's another tree, and now I'm thirsty, and there's a tree, and it's the same thing. I like walking through New York City. I like walking through bookstores. I like to see shop windows. I like to see people's faces. That I find interesting. A tree I don't find so interesting. So I'm hiking, doing this running monologue I'm doing for you for my family, who are rolling their eyes, of course. And I spot on a parallel trail a boy about 5 or 6 years old, sort of walking on his own. I think to myself, what if that boy just came out of the woods right now and said, I've always lived in the woods. I don't know any other life. I never knew parents. I broke into cabins to feed myself or to stay warm in the winter. I lived off fruits and berries and things like that, but I have no idea how I ended up there. And 35 years pass, and he still doesn't know. And then as an adult man, he gets a match, a DNA match in one of those sites. And as the book opens, page 1, because we don't waste time, he is standing across the street from his biological father, about to ask the question that will lead to the mystery that you will finally know the origin of The Boy from the Woods.
Did you ever expect to write this book?
Well, when I wrote The Boy from the Woods, some people were like, whoa, you never told us how he got there. It's sort of like a superhero kind of a thing where you didn't learn the origin story. So a lot of people are starting with the match and then going back and reading The Boy from the Woods. And they aren't really like most series where you have to go in order. I think they're different. But I always knew I was going to tell that story. When I realized it really wouldn't fit in the first book, so I did know pretty early on. And I always knew how he ended up in the woods. So I was really it was sort of ripe for the telling. And then as always, or more recently especially, what I'm seeing in the world always sort of comes into it. So I was watching with my daughters, because I'll watch anything with my kids that are no longer kids to spend time with them, you know what I mean? Like even shows I hate. And they were watching reality TV. In fact, we're competing against one of the shows right now that's on here on the East Coast that I was talking about. And I was watching these reality TV shows, some of them with dating, and that led to Instagram influencers, online trolling, bullying. And I'm like, how can I put that in this story of Wilde trying to find out what happened to his past. And what part, a few of these will be in, a few of them won't, but all of it was in. So it's a really interesting look at how manipulative and how destructive a lot of those sort of worlds are. And when these kids that get sudden fame, all of a sudden lose it or are canceled or disappear. So one of them characters that he matches with, one of the people that Wilde matches with, it had won a Bachelor type show and has now disappeared under really weird circumstances. And so Wilde has to dive into that world as well to get the answers.
So way back when we were starting out here, this world didn't even exist. It was a much more like Kinsey Millhone and all of that. Private investigators used real shoe leather. They weren't, using digital stuff and keyboards and all. But it seems to me, Harlan, it'd be really difficult to write a modern thriller and not take all of this into account. I'm seeing an increasing amount of it. Women writers are doing an awful lot where Instagram groups and competition and toxic friendships or envy or whatever it is are playing a bigger and bigger role. I feel myself getting older while I'm reading them because I made a decision not to do social media. I do the Instagram for the bookstore, but I thought, I can live my life without being an influencer or on Twitter. We have people who do that. So it's hard for me to understand how traumatic it can be for people who do live their lives on social media to have anything go wrong, to be ghosted, to be trolled, to be all these other terms. I had to actually look up ghosted. I didn't know what it meant.
For those who don't know, ghosted is if you go on a date with somebody or whatever else and never hear from them again. You've been ghosted. You've been made to disappear. And I'm not a cutting edge guy by any stretch of the imagination either. I have, my kids, my youngest is 20, my oldest is 27. So I get a lot of the information from them. But, if you're writing a book that takes place in the modern era, when I wrote the first Myron Bolitar book, I had scenes when Myron and Wynne would go on their cell phones so they could hear what each other was saying. And that was like, wow, cutting edge wild technology. Now that would be the equivalent of two kids with a can and a string, two cans and a string between them. So I think if I'm writing a book that's in a modern era, I have to reflect what's going on. No one goes on a date anymore and doesn't Google the person's name. That world doesn't exist anymore. And 15 years ago when I wrote about it, it was just first starting to exist. So I'm always I don't do a lot of research on it. It's just where the world that we live in. The last book, Boy from the Woods, had a little bit more of the political, not in politics right and left, but the political stuff of fake news and how easily we're manipulated online and all that sort of a thing, and how easy you could turn stories around, because that's what's going on in the world today. And so that's normally what I try to write.
And you do.
It also gives it great drama. It's not that I'm not teaching you, but you will learn about these places, but it's such a cool, people care so much about these shows with Rose, that leads to, raises emotion to the 10th power, and the tension is there, and that's drama.
And the threat is there. You're lucky you have 4 kids who can haul you screaming into this age. I was thinking, reading about this, this terrible situation in the Ukraine, that military fiction, the wide web, is going to really change the way I think that writers are going to have to approach things.
Oh, you're freezing on me.
My internet just so funny.
Yeah,
I know. I'm sorry. It does that every once in a while.
I'll do a reading.
Am I all right now?
Your internet gets stronger. No, you seem like you're back. Okay, go ahead.
I'm back.
Okay.
I was talking about military thrillers having to take into account the new way war is being waged in the Ukraine, and the effect of the web bringing civilians into the war. We saw some of it in the Vietnam War with all the news coverage.
Right.
But I certainly think that this war is going to change things, and it's going to change the way people write about it. If I fade again, do feel free to read. So here's Wilde, and he's DNA testing and genetics are also going to have to play a role in this, aren't they?
Yeah, and this is also what I mean by challenging for new books. You know, we both have read a million books, you know, where they find out that the father's not the father, the mother's not the mother. But now that's really not going to be realistic anymore, because everybody, if they have a question about it and not sure about the, you know, is going to do one of these DNA sort of tests. And we're discovering, of course, that also leads to news stories. So all this technology always leads to news stories. We both remember the old black and white movies where you would see the detective calling somebody on the phone, they wouldn't answer. And maybe they would show a shot of the phone ringing. Oh, somebody pick up, please. Well, of course you can't do that. Now everybody's got a cell phone. So you have to change if you're writing a modern thriller. But the good thing for me about that is, with all these technologies, it takes away and it gives you something. And it makes it fresh, because the mystery in this would have never been able to have been done a few years ago, and the answer would have never been able to happen a few years ago. It can only sort of happen now. And so I take it as a positive when these things develop.
Well, you know, it's affected fiction, the Lost Heir plot, you know, the fraternity plot, and actually is changing lawsuits too, because, you know, there used to be paternity suits and nobody knew for sure what was going on unless the kid looked exactly like his dad. Or, you know, we had Bleak House by Dickens, where a Lost Heir plot went on for whatever and eventually bankrupted everybody involved in it. Those have gone away, but now we have, you know, tracking people through their DNA, relatives, the Golden State Killer. We've got all kinds of stuff so as long as you can keep up with it, that's great. Tell us about Hester, because Hester is back in this book. She's got, happily, she's got a love life now. She's got a guy, but Hester.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Wild.
Hester has been a minor character in a lot of my books. I think almost every one since the book Over Your Head there. I think One False Move was maybe her first, which is 1999, 98, right. Something like that. She's been in a lot of books. And so it was interesting in The Boy from the Woods to sort of let her be a co-lead almost with Wilde. And she's back, and yeah, she has a romance, and she's in her 70s. That romance, actually, this is interesting, it went in a different direction than I expected to. I expected it to go one way after she learned something, and it ended up not happening. That's sometimes happens with a character, where you're trying to have things happen to them and they just won't cooperate. She's been one of my favorite characters because she's funny and dynamic, and she's strong, and she takes no bull, and she's a lawyer that you want on your side, as Myron has been lucky enough to have her on his side many times. And here she has a relationship with Wilde. Wilde was her son's best friend many years ago. And I just think that adds another dynamic. And also, what I like about, you know, now that I'm more reaching those ages anyway, but I think, you know, we can both say this, Barbara, you're always 17 waiting for your life to begin. Until you get older, you really don't kind of get that. It's something I wrote in a book once, maybe years ago. You don't really feel old ever. You're always 17 waiting for your life to begin. And that's Hester. So Hester still has, even though she's a very successful lawyer on TV and she's in her 70s, she still has butterflies when she's first going to go on a date with this new guy. And I just kind of think that's an important thing to bring out. It also, again, dramatically super compelling stuff to have Hester on her side and doing this weird murder case involving a guy who's, I don't want to give away too many plot things there. So it was really kind of fun to have Hester, who's 70-ish, with this guy who's very vivacious and gregarious and never stops talking, with this guy, Wilde, who basically is quiet, lives in the woods, and is more comfortable being alone because of his upbringing in the woods, and having them sort of team up.
So I like to think that 80 is the new 60, Harlan.
Exactly. Every year we go up, but we decide what young. It's kind of like, you know, when you're driving in a car and everybody is going faster than you as a crazy driver. It's like anybody older than you is really old, but everybody who's not is fine, you know. So that keeps changing as you age.
It really does. I find myself during the winter season, when we have so many older people that come to Phoenix for the winter, and I find myself snarling at them as they're turning right from the left turn lane or going, you know, 12 miles an hour in a 40 zone or something, and I hear myself going, another old geezer, and then I realized I'm probably older than they are, but you're right. It really, it really is how you feel. And, and I do think the possibility
you're going out again on me.
And,
I'll bring up.
Love you. It's one of the things that makes it. I am.
Yeah, so I was bringing up until you. Okay, now it seems like you're back. I was bringing up Winslow to distract while you were. I think you're back.
I don't have any idea why it does this. We actually had to have the house rewired for the internet because there was some rain damage. I tried to get our puppy, one of the two puppies, to come and sit in my lap so I could show him to you, but Rob was rattling food, and so he wasn't even a little interested in staying here. So Harlan, you've been on what? Good Morning America. You've done a conversation with Lee Child earlier. What pearls of wisdom can you offer us from your previous discussions of this book?
It was fun. I was Good Morning America with George Stephanopoulos this morning, and that's always a fun thing, though. Because of COVID, I couldn't get makeup, which is really disturbing because it's the only day of the year I get to wear makeup. And I look great with makeup, and I'd still be wearing it now and look better for you people. And one year I was actually tweeting all of this saying, I really love the makeup and stuff like that. And all of a sudden my phone blows up with my kids saying, stop tweeting about makeup. So, but it's always fun. Release day's always interesting, but in the COVID era, it's different. I miss seeing your faces, and I'm talking to you, the audience out there. I miss seeing that sort of reaction in person when I'm sitting with Barbara and I can see you guys and I can sort of tell it. Everything feels a little more in a vacuum. I've had actually 3 TV series out during COVID. The challenges of filming during COVID, I could do a whole talk on also. But as well as they've done, or not well as they've done, I want to be out in the world to sort of see that reaction. This is a champagne problem, of course. I recognize that. I've been extraordinarily lucky, and COVID for me has not been nearly as bad as for anybody else in many ways, one of which is that I'm an introvert. My job is to sit in a room alone and write, and so I can still do that. So it hasn't affected my sort of work.
It's so hard for me to think of Harlan as an introvert.
But so someone would describe it as a socially.
I see him, he's in full introvert.
It's more of a socially adept introvert. Like, I'm good with this sort of thing, and then I get completely exhausted, and I need to just lie down or be in a room. And I do, some people gather energy from these sort of things. I'm frankly telling you that I lose energy. But this is also like I kind of get up for it, and then I really crash. But again, this is my 35th book, my 34th novel. I wrote one kid's picture book. So 35, that's a lot of time alone in a room. If you don't want to spend a lot of time alone in a room, you're not meant to be a writer.
It's a good thing that your wife has such a spectacular career of her own, and therefore doesn't resent the fact that you are keeping equally busy. She's head of something at Columbia, right?
She's director of admissions for the medical school at Columbia University's medical school. But for her, it's kind of a win because I got, she had a family member or a spouse or a partner who stayed home. I was the stay-at-home parent. I worked out of the house when the kids were young. I did most of the driving. I would say, you read in the paper, you see fictional stories about people who really are 50-50 couples, but we always know that means that the woman's doing a lot more than the man. But in our case, in terms of raising the kids, it really was 50-50. She loves to cook, I like drive all the kids. It was a very, very good mix when the kids were young.
Indeed. Well, you've been married a long time and your kids are grown, so obviously you worked it out. So is there anything else you'd like to say about the match before we segue into talking about movies and other stuff from your work?
No, the only other thing I should point out is this is one of these things where people are always wondering how much you plan in advance. So I always know the beginning and the end. But as I was writing it, around page 50, The Stranger popped up. For those who read the book, The Stranger, or to segue into TV, who saw the TV show, The Stranger, at the end of the book and the end of the TV series, The Stranger gets away. And I really never thought about where The Stranger went after that. It wasn't like I wanted to write a sequel. And as I'm writing this book, and there's a certain kind of character, I always ask myself, well, who's going to be the person who is this character? And I realized, whoa, it's the stranger. The stranger would be doing exactly this. So it's really, this book is kind of a sequel to The Stranger, and kind of a sequel to The Boy from the Woods, and kind of a total standalone. And I do think it's one of my most emotionally potent endings. You won't guess the ending, that I hope happens with a lot of books. This one's really hard to guess the ending. I think it might be one of the hardest. But more important for me is I think it really has some emotional resonance. I think it will stick with you when you close the book. And that's all I can say about The Match. It's one of my favorites, and I really hope you enjoy it.
Well, I certainly did. And, you make an interesting point that you can read The Match and then go back and read The Boy from the Woods. It doesn't always work that way. But right. I did notice that there was some frustration with some readers about not knowing enough about the boy in The Boy from the Woods. So you've neatly resolved that by writing The Match. What are you working on now?
The next book is a standalone. This is always the question. I could write a Myron, I could write a Wynne, I could write a Wilde, I could write somebody else. But I always start with an idea. And once I have that idea in place, for example, The Boy from the Woods, I explained how I came up with the idea. And obviously Myron couldn't tell that story because he's not a 6-year-old boy, unless he was telling what happened to the kid. So that's when I came up with the idea of this character, Wilde. So rather than trying to force it and have to do a Myron or have to do a Wynne, so I came up with an idea that doesn't fit for any of the characters. So it'll be another, which most of my books have been over the last 20-something years. It'll be a standalone with all new characters. I mean, there may be a wink. Hester might pop up or something like that. Wynne's family always seems to pop up, but it's a standalone story.
Well, so much of your fiction has taken place in New Jersey. Does it feel like it's kind of a Harlan Coben universe there in New Jersey?
It is, or it does feel that way. What's been interesting also is that, again, segueing in, the TV series never take place here in New Jersey. Finally, this one will. The new one I just mentioned to you, Shelter, the Mickey Bolitar series, will take place in New Jersey. But what I found is that the more specific you are as a writer, the more universal the appeal. The more I'm very specifically New Jersey, the more people in Bulgaria are going to understand it. If I try to make it every town USA because I'm trying to appeal to my Indonesian audience, that's when you lose it. The more, again, for those who are writing, the more specific you are, the more universal it will be. If you think of all of your favorite stories, they were very specific in terms of setting and place. And they weren't your home necessarily. Usually, rarely it isn't. That's what makes it become more important and more universal.
I so agree with you. My favorite series, almost always, the landscape, the culture, whatever, is just as much a main character as the people. I mean, here in the Southwest, we have Tony Hillerman, for example, who probably today would not, Harlan, be allowed to write that series because, he isn't what he wrote about. And I'm sad to see that has taken hold to some degree, because I think fiction is about imagination and people should be allowed to write male or female characters or different communities. But, it's a little bit hard to do that. But I have to say that Harlan has expanded my knowledge of New Jersey, as I've already pointed out. I only knew a little part of it on the Hudson. And it's interesting that this series, because a lot of your books are what people call domestic suspense, neighborhoods or families or house. And one of the things I really liked about Wilde was the mountains. I liked the wild and wild.
I'm always trying to find. It's always funny. People always want to label you something, right? So I'm the domestic suspense guy, even though probably maybe half the books would actually fit that category. I mean, the Myron Bolitars are not family novels. He's a single guy. I mean, he may have a good, he has a good relationship with his parents, but you would never call those domestic suspense. Not Wilde, especially, is a loner who's out in the woods, so those wouldn't be. Wynne, that's certainly not either. Fool Me Once was a woman in the military who also just was a single mom. Same with Caught, single mom. So it really doesn't apply, but you're thought of that way. And whatever I'm sort of doing, I usually react to it by doing something very, very different, even if it doesn't necessarily show. If I wrote Hold Tight a number of books ago, which had 32 viewpoints. That's going to be, by the way, the next series on Netflix. It's a Polish series. 32 viewpoints in the book. So the next book, and it went in very small communities. The next book I wrote was first person, and I traveled all over, London, Paris, wherever. So I usually do, I don't do it consciously, but subconsciously, I kind of react to what I've done. If I do too many male leads, I'll do a female lead. If somebody's talking too much, then it'll be somebody who's quiet. Whatever it is, I find I react to it and to try to change it up.
You know, you raised an interesting question. I wonder if one of the reasons people often call your books domestic suspense is nobody quite knows how to describe New Jersey.
I mean, even Tell No One, which was my first Breakout novel, Beck was single. His wife was supposedly murdered. That's the whole story. He was, they were a newly married couple without children. His wife gets murdered, 8 years pass. He sees her on a webcam, still alive. But if he's not married, he's living alone in the and he's working in the streets in New York. He's working in a underserved area as a pediatrician. So it is interesting that I'm known as a domestic suspense guy, but I just shaved off about 20 books that weren't of the 35 that had nothing at all to do with that sort of thing. But that's all good as long as you're reading. I don't care how you label it.
I don't know. I mean, we don't classify your books at all. We have a whole, I mean, basically at the Poison Pen, we just call everything fiction and, shelve it. We have a few breakout sections because we almost have to. But at one point when Diana Gabaldon and Clive Cussler were our two local authors, and obviously, therefore, two of our very best sellers, neither one of them fit into any category and still don't to a large degree. So we just gave up on labels. I think a lot of them today, Harlan, are applied because not personal book selling, internet book selling and so forth. They put tags on everything so people can look stuff up. And I'm always infuriated when people come into the store and say things like, I never read books by women. And, my instinct is to go get a book by a woman and shove it under their nose and say, it's surprising. I mean, a lot of readers are eclectic, but it is surprising how sometimes people resist trying things new. So we have several Books of the Month Club. We have 7 on different topics. And I finally put together, or Patrick and I put together mailing lists for all of them. And I wrote to them about how we select the books every month. And I made a point of saying that part of the reason they belong is to have the experience of reading different kinds of books. And so we work hard at making sure that, that things are different. So in our first mystery club, we've had a heist novel. We're about to have a legal thriller. We had, with the Violent Conspiracy, this is a musician thriller, if you want to call it, a missing strand. And that is part of it. It is trying to force people to read stuff that they wouldn't necessarily pick up and get them out of a literary rut, such as it is. But I think you've done a great job over the years in writing so many different books that you have essentially achieved the same effect for your fans.
Well, thank you. I mean, the one thing I do always want to be is suspenseful. I still want, the match I'm hoping will be the book you take to bed tonight at 10 or 11 o'clock and say, I'm only going to read for 15 minutes. Next thing you know, it's 4 a.m. and you're cursing me. I mean, I want that immersion effect no matter what I write. And hopefully that's maybe part of why you might clump them together. They'll have that same effect. I'm hoping they'll have that same effect, that same bingeability, if you will.
Well, some of us already have. Some of us who get advanced reading copies, that is to say, booksellers, have done that. And your copies, there I go again, being unstable. Patrick, maybe it's time to call Patrick back and see if he can rescue me from this internet connection that I can't seem to control. Patrick,
Barbara, by the way, Patrick, just so we can write this down, Barbara just admitted she's unstable. Barbara just admitted she's unstable. Write that down.
Yeah.
I forgot to drink a toast to you because this is your, in fact, on sale date, Harlan, and I got all set and then I blew it.
This is my first store.
Green tea.
And I think I've probably been to your store as much as anybody else's. I mean, it has to be at least 10 times that we've done events, maybe more over the years.
We have, and I'm hoping very much because we are actually rolling into live events. We've done several this week and last week. And starting in April, Harlan, 2/3 of our events are live again.
Yeah, and also you can move them outside in your case too. You know, if you open the air up. I was really on the fence this time about going virtual or not, but I just, I figured especially I decided 2 or 3 months ago when Omicron was at its height, just didn't see the point. I don't never want to risk anybody's health. There's a lot of advantages to being able to talk to people like this. And part of what you were mentioning before about the war and things like that. I mean, part of what we want to do is help you escape. That it's escapism too. There's nothing wrong with saying that. And so just felt there was one more year. I think I was supposed to come to your store. I was supposed to go on book tour March 17th, 2 years ago. And I was one of the first authors to cancel it because my wife, being at Columbia Presbyterian, New York Presbyterian Hospital, we had a lot of, not insider information, but we were part of these sort of secret, my wife was part of sort of quiet talks about what was about to come. So I think we saw it a little bit ahead of time. And I know a number of stores were disappointed when I canceled, but of course, we would have canceled anyway in the end. So I would just rather always be on the side of caution in terms of that. But I think it is time, and hopefully the outdoors, especially where you guys already have a couple events outdoors, that'll get things moving again. And I can't wait to be back next year.
Well, we hope so too. And what we've discovered is that Zoom has brought us a whole and very large new audience, much of which is international. I wish you could have seen Patrick's face about 3 weeks ago. We were doing something and he lit up and he said, "We have our first question from Mongolia." Who was that, Patrick? I mean, was that great? And so, we videoed our events for 20 years and we're going to go right on doing it. So even if you're live at the Poison Pen, you will still be reaching this very, very large audience. We've actually created a little bit of a TV studio now in the store. And Patrick has got new equipment and practicing up. So
Yeah.
we're going to keep the best of both worlds. The fact that you can see live people and experience the fun of talking to your fans, but we aren't going to lose the larger internet audience, which I think is a wonderful compromise. Patrick, you've been just fabulous at Segway. In fact, Harlan was one of our very first Zoom events.
I remember that. Well, you can't teach old dogs new tricks, right? And sometimes it's good for us.
Did we do it that first year even? Did we do it in March?
2020, yeah.
Wow, so we did it right. You guys got on it fast. But you guys, we were talking before about the books doing modern technology. But I recall, I think you guys were the first ones to live stream signings and to actually tape them. So that I remember doing. So,
we did our first one in 1996, Harlan.
Wow.
PD James was our very first video event. And no, it was 1995, sorry, because it was the year we hosted Left Coast Crime and she was one of the guests of honor. And so we've done it ever since. But the technology behind being able to put events out in video and reaching people, that's what's progressed. We haven't done anything different, but and Zoom is a way better technology than the old ones that we had. Also, 5G may make a difference. It might solve this internet glitch that I seem to be having, but if we have faster internet, I think that the programs will look better. They will go better. But it's really been fun. Patrick's been a whiz. So speaking of you, Patrick, do you have any questions of your own or from people watching?
Yeah, both. Speaking of Mongolia, Tony, well, I got to say up front, one of the benefits of doing these, although they can seem impersonal in a way, but we've made a lot of friends and connections with people from all over the world, because I'm always monitoring the comments feed, and a lot of people like Tony, who's tuning in from Romania tonight, he watches a lot of our programs. Hi, Tony. Just people from all over the place, and it's that is an added benefit of this that we didn't expect. And
let me add one other thing too to that, Harlan, which is if you're not managing a big crowd and wondering about how many hours the signing line will take, we have found that we've had some much more in-depth conversations with some authors than we ever had when they were live, because we didn't have all those other factors to contend with. So we've had some some different relationships with authors than we've had in the past, and that's been a very welcome thing.
That's cool.
So let's give Tony the first question. He actually has two. He says, hello from Romania. I have read 32 of your books. You are awesome. And he says, are Mickey and Myron based on real people? And the second question is, who are your favorite writers?
Well, Myron is, it's always hard to admit this sort of thing, but Myron is me with wish fulfillment. I mean, I played college basketball, but he's much better. He's funnier, he's smarter, he's stronger, he's wiser, he's a better friend. I haven't beaten two areas. One, I'm a better dancer, I'll demonstrate later. And two, I'm wiser in the ways of women. This is not great shakes. It's like saying syphilis is better than gonorrhea. We're not talking about two geniuses, but Myron's love life is sort of for the most part, has been disastrous while I've been with the same woman for a long time. When I created them, though, I created a tension between us. I'm not sure it was intentional or not anymore, but Myron has what I want and I have what Myron wants. So Myron's whole dream in life is to move to a house like this in the suburbs and have a basketball court like I have over there and 4 kids like I had, the backyard barbecue, the whole family scene, and he's never had that. So Myron is jealous of me in that way. On the other hand, I lost my parents at a young age. And so when I write Myron's parents, I get melodramatic and I overwrite them. I admit that readily. If you don't like them, skip it. It's my therapy. But that's the relationship I would imagine I'd be having now with my parents had they survived. So I'm a little jealous of him in that way. So that's kind of worked out pretty well for us to have these tensions between us. Mickey, what happened with Mickey Bolitar, and that's for those who don't know, that's Myron's nephew who I spun off into a 3-book series of his own and now a TV series. When I was writing the book, Mickey kind of popped up as a character, a 16-year-old who was similar to Myron, but grew up in a much darker way, a much darker character than Myron. But he was just in a Myron Bolitar book. And it wasn't until I was about 3/4 of the way through that book, almost done with it, when I said, I wonder if I can give Mickey his own stories, Mickey his own books. And so Mickey was a spin-off. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't like I said, ooh, I'm going to give Myron this nephew so I can spin him off into his own series. But it just sort of happened that way. But those are the best kind of, like I mentioned how the stranger just popped up into the story of the match. Mickey just happened to pop up into a Myron Bolitar novel. Thanks for the question. I appreciate it.
Is it fun writing from Mickey's perspective, or from, how is it different than writing an adult thriller? Is there much?
It's actually almost it's almost not different at all. If you're a Myron Bolitar fan and you've been staying away from Mickey because you think it's just for kids, it's not. It's just from the vantage point of a 16-year-old. So that's a different vantage point, the same way other books are from old people or young people or men or women or race, creed, color, whatever genre, whatever person is. So the only difference is younger. And in fact, I would argue that Mickey's a darker character than Myron, where Myron sort of had this nice childhood with loving parents. In the beginning, the first line of the Mickey Bolitar novel is, my father is dead, my mother's in rehab, and my girlfriend's just disappeared. So he starts off really behind the 8 ball. He's a darker character. His story's a little bit darker than Myron's. And I'd never, with young adult, you can't dumb it down. Kids smell that right away and hate it. So the only difference is they're shorter. But really, outside of shorter and the fact that he's a 16-year-old, there's almost no difference between my 3 young adult novels, the trilogy, the Mickey Bolitar trilogy, and the adult Myron books.
Wow.
So how do you think Amazon will treat those, Harlan? Will they treat them as though they were, in fact, adult programming?
It'll be a young adult series just because if you have mostly characters who are young adults, they get classified that way. But I do think adults will like it in the same way that, did you like Stranger Things or 13 Reasons Why? It's not going to be a pure high school kind of a show that's only going to appeal to young people. And having Constance Zimmer and adult stories, and I'm in charge of this show, so whatever it is, if it's good or bad, you can blame me. So my intention is to have also a really kind of cool adult story going on at the same time as the young kids are going on.
So it's not going to be Mickey Bolitar in Euphoria?
No, it's not. It's not going to be that kind of cutting edge stuff, no.
Let's see, Renee has a couple of nice comments. She said, Barbara, sometime you should see beautiful southern New Jersey too. Let's see here. She says, Harlan, you might want to try hugging a tree soon. Then you might appreciate nature better.
Harlan and I have revealed some weaknesses in
I
our
like
general approach here.
Yeah. Barbara, you're getting a lot of nice comments that you're an original influencer.
It's true. That's actually a really good point.
Yeah, totally.
You are an Instagram influencer before the days of Instagram. You were an influencer very early on.
Analog influencer.
You know, it's just, you talk about accidental things happening, Harlan, as the story takes you. When I opened the Poison Pen in the art district in 1989, when it was really hot in Scottsdale, it was an axis. Santa Fe, Scottsdale, La Jolla was this enormous art market, you know, before the 90s all fell apart. And we had this little tiny store there. And it was my intention to have a store like, you know, the Mysterious Bookshop, where we opened the door and people strolled in and we sold books over the counter. And in idle moments, I would get to read books, a very Dickensian kind of view of a bookstore. And 2 days in, as every single person who would come into the store lived somewhere else, not a single Scottsdale person had arrived. I thought, okay, this story's going to go differently. And I got out a yellow pad and I said, write down your contact information and I will write to you. And so I started writing to people within the first month we were open. And that's really all I do, aside from talking to you and other authors, is I write, don't I, Patrick? I write all the time.
All the time.
And I had never anticipated that. And frankly, I wondered at the beginning if anybody would care what I had to say about books. It's been a real surprise over the years to discover that, in fact, Patrick is probably a bigger influencer than I am. How much people pay attention to what we say.
Well, they trust you. I mean, you guys have proven yourself time and time again. Also proving man plans, God laughs, as I like to say in a lot of books.
That's right.
It's nothing ever works out the way it is. But you know, you're the Poison Pen. That's saying Poison Pen is saying crime fiction to most people, and those people out there who are watching know that they can rely on you guys, to find diamonds in the rough, as well as people who are a little more established now, like myself. But I wasn't established when I first came to your store, was I? I was an unknown.
Oh, we have very different tastes too. Patrick has a profile that's different than mine. We have a staff member who's an absolute giant in the world of romance and women's fiction. And I have to tell you, to our great surprise, Patrick's and mine recently did a killer interview with Karen Slaughter. The two of us almost dropped dead.
That was great.
Interesting.
It was, and he did a wonderful job proving that he too is an eclectic reader.
Cool.
On a more serious note, let's get down to business here. Letitia wants to know, do you like Yoo-Hoo just like Myron?
I don't. I really actually kind of hate it. And I've kicked myself really for doing that, because Yoo-Hoo sent me a bunch of free Yoo-Hoos when the series came out. And I'm like, man, I could have had him drinking like Macallan's 25-year-old scotch or something. If I knew I was going to get something free out of it, I would have had him driving a Mercedes and drinking, a fancy scotch or bourbon. So that was a mistake on my part, I think, making Myron. And people, I think it's probably happened at your store, Barbara. Almost every stop, someone will bring me a bottle of Yoo-Hoo, and I'm trying to be polite about it, but it tastes like bad chocolate milk that somehow doesn't spoil, which scares me as well. So in many ways, you are your character, and in many ways, you are not.
I think it's fans, trying to find some way to bond with you, and it's an obvious.
I think it's so flattering. I can't even tell you. It's so sweet and flattering. I usually tell them too. I go, no, I don't drink it, but someone here will, and we'll have fun with it.
Let's see. Amber, she says, I recently got my friend addicted to Harlan's books. Just One Look hooked me about 15 years ago. If Harlan could pick one of his own books to recommend for a new reader to start, which one would it be?
It's so hard. It's like choosing between your children. And also some of the older ones, Here's the thing, like people will always say that are longtime fans, oh, I like the old ones. But if they went back and read them now, it's because that's the first ones you read. So of course there's, it's the surprise of a new author, the first 4 or 5. After you've read 30, hopefully the enjoyment is still there, but it's a different level. Lee Child and I were sort of talking about this today because we read each other's books. And we read Conley, and we're talking about Dennis and Lehane and all those people today. We were sort of saying, for us now, it's almost like I've gotten a letter from a friend. Lee was saying when he read The Match, he was like, oh, so here's what Harlan's been thinking about over the last year, and these are the issues that have been concerning him. And I think that happens when you have a long time sort of reader. So, the answer most people give is tell no one, but I wrote Tell No One 22 years ago. So I don't know if all of that stuff makes as much sense as it does now. If you like something darker, Win, which was the last book, is good. I really love The Match. I think it's a great place to start. Other people, Just One Look but that I wrote 20 years ago. I just don't know. You guys know better than I do. Someone comes into your store and they say, I've never read a Harlan Coben book. I want to try it. The one you recommend will be better than anything. And I'm also too close to them. It's my, that's the other funny thing about doing the TV series. So when I do them, I have to reread the book. And sometimes, or I listen to them on audio, and I was doing The Innocent not long ago, we were doing it in Spain, and literally in the middle of it, I'm going, where am I going with this? Who is this character? Like, I actually didn't even know I'm like, wow, this thing is so twisted, I don't even know where I'm going with this anymore. So it's hard for me to be the one to judge.
It's a lot different than if all the books are in a series. Then, the obvious answer is to go back to the beginning, because no matter how different the plots are, there's always relationship spoilers and other things in a long-running series. But because you change things up all the time, that doesn't apply. I mostly tell people Tell No One, but I loved Win. We talked about Win last year. I thought we had a great conversation about Win. Yeah. And that would be, I think, a strong recommendation.
It's funny you mentioned, and everybody makes that comparison between their books and their kids. And I always want to say, parents have a favorite kid. They just won't admit it, right?
But it's interesting. I really don't. And also changed. Like one day I'll think, oh, this book was my best. And then I'll think, no, this one. I really, and the positive side of that is I can't tell you which is the worst book either. I've never written one that I've looked back on saying, other than the first 2, which I put a letter in the front saying, don't read these because I was young and stupid. I don't really have a book that I say this is not as good as some of the other ones. That's the best book I could write at the time, and I think that they all hold up pretty much the same. And the only counter to what you say, Barbara, is my first Myron Bolitar book was Deal Breaker, but I don't think it's that good anymore. So I'd rather you started with like Fade Away and then go back, because that's Myron's origin story in the same way The Match is Wild's origin story. So I never know. So I just stay out of it.
Those are the bleeding balls.
Sorry, Ted?
The bleeding balls covers.
Oh.
Yeah, those were the days.
I wanted to point out there's another factor at play here, which I think is really important. People who are not readers never understand why readers have a pile of books. A reader never has like one book on the nightstand or one book by the chair. And that's confusing to not readers, but the truth is you may feel, you don't always feel like reading a particular book. You may not be up for an intense thriller. You might want to read something that's just kind of romancy and pleasant, or so you never know what mood you're in until you're there and you want to pick up a book. And that's why most people have a pile of books. And I think that's true with your books, Harlan, that on any particular day in any particular mood, one book is going to work better than another, but neither you nor I can predict what that is for that reader.
But tell her Just One Look, whoever asked that question, that's a good pick. It's the first time I risked doing a female lead all the way through, and I was very nervous about doing that. At the time, it wasn't being done very often. It was tricky, and I really enjoyed how that book turned out.
I found a whole bunch of questions here on my, I don't mean to be rude, I'm just looking at the questions on Facebook on my phone here. And there's, because some of them, for whatever reason, aren't showing up on the computer, but who cares? Stefania from Italy has asked a few questions. She says, "Good evening, Mr. Coben." I almost said Mr. Cohen. I'm sorry. I'm very happy to have a chance to ask something. I would like to know if sometimes scares yourself. Okay, what scares you, Harlan? I'm just translating what she's writing.
Well, the interesting thing is, I think I get a lot of my fear out of me by writing these books, so I put them on you. I'm not a particularly frightened person. I'm also, as I gotten older, I'm really good with the serenity prayer, where I try to let go of things that I can't control. So I don't really know. My job is to give you what scares you. And I don't know. I don't have to frighten. It's more what's going to intrigue. I want to mess with your head a little bit in a positive way. I really don't want you. I don't think my books are scary in that sort of way. But I do think that because of maybe what I write, it works a little bit like therapy. I'm not a very stressed or scared person. Flaubert has a great quote about writers where he says, you should be orderly, regular, and bourgeois in your real life, so you can be violent and original in your work. I think that's me. I have the very, I'm just a normal sort of suburban dad kind of thing, and in this kind of quiet environment, in this little placid pool, I can make a little big splash with a small stone.
Yeah, Stefania, she's asked a number of other questions, and a lot of them just deal with how books have the power to change people's lives, and do you think that, people are reading enough these days, is the gist of one of her questions. What's the importance of books and reading in this crazy world? Things like that. And you're such a tireless advocate for literacy and books, and you're always very generously championing other writers. Maybe talk about that for a moment.
I think it's a good place to, sort of a good thing to sort of think about and end on in a way, is that here's the thing about reading, whatever book you're reading. I don't care if it's a comic book. Reading brings empathy. Reading gives you empathy, especially reading fiction. And there's not enough empathy in this world. We can all agree on. I don't care if you're right wing or left wing. So the more we read, the more empathetic you are, the more you're understanding other experiences. My job as a writer, I've taken viewpoints I completely disagree with, but I want to make that person seem human and whole to you. And so that's the real advantage of the thing that readers in general, and a lot of you, if you're out there, you're readers, you're more empathetic than most people. It's just a fact. And so that's what reading is so important. And we are reading less. I don't really understand how this all works. And Barbara, maybe book sales, we keep telling book sales are up. But when I'm at the airport or whatever else, I see everybody on these things. I rarely see people with books anymore. I don't read as well as I used to be honest. I have to really make myself focus. But here's the thing, there's nothing bad about reading. It's like when you go to a book convention, when you go to BoucherCon or one of these things, it's one of these few things in life where there's nothing negative. You can say that about, like if you're watching a football game, guys are getting hurt, right? There's something negative about everything. There's nothing negative in reading. And it's all good. It's all good for you. You never read a book and then feel like, I wish I hadn't read a book. I wish I'd done something else instead. Never. You're always happy. So keep reading. And it's just, and encouraging people to read, because it really can possibly, and don't write a book where people are moralizing or lecturing or teaching. No, story is about empathy. And so that's my lecture to you and my advice to you. Keep reading, people.
Let's see. Susan Burkhoff would like me to tell you she said hello.
Hello. Hi, Susan.
Let's see here. Just a few more, just quickies. Sure. I know that you've, last time we talked to you, you talked about how your habit of writing in longhand. Can you talk about that? Do you still
Sure.
do that, or?
I do both. I mean, I've always done both, but I sort of sketch out on notebooks. I like something freeing and childlike about pen to paper. The other good thing I always say about the pen to paper is you can cross things out. When you delete something on a computer, it's gone. But if I cross out, I can kind of still see it. It doesn't completely go away. And the biggest thing is it's sort of like I'm checking out the map before I go out. I'm looking a little bit ahead of me. When I then take those pages and put it into the computer, and I do it every, say, 10 pages or so, I don't write the whole thing by hand. That means my first draft is already my second draft. So my first draft is already my second draft. That's an advantage. At the same time, do whatever makes you write. So if you're writing just by some days I can go straight to my laptop and just start typing it out, I'm going to do that. The best writing advice I can give you is live your life this way. If it helps me write and gets me pages, good. If it doesn't produce pages, bad. End. That's it. If it helps me produce pages, good. If it doesn't help me produce pages, bad. When I hired my assistant after I finally had success enough to do that, I told her, here's your job. What can I do to free Harlan up so he can write? If it means some crap job that you gotta do it. If it means something fun and exciting, good. But all you need to think about is what can I do so Harlan can write more? And that's how I kind of live my life.
All right, so Janie wants a few lightning round questions. Janie wants to know. She says, after the discussion about the match concludes, here's my question. Will we get more Win?
I don't know. I think so. I explained a little bit how I come up with ideas, and then I asked the question, who's going to tell that story? Most of the time, it's somebody new. Sometimes it's Myron. Sometimes it'll be Win, and sometimes it'll be Wild, and sometimes it might be a combination. But I don't say I'm going to write a Win book now or a Myron book now or whatever. So the answer is probably a Myron book, probably a Win book, probably a Wild book, but man plans, God laughs.
When the right story appears, Win will appear, right?
That's right. I don't want to force it. I don't want to say, oh, what can I do in the rich man's world so I can get Win back in? That doesn't work. I have to come up with a good story that I want to tell and then figure out who's going to tell it.
Let's see here. Okay. Someone keeps asking, do you have a favorite all-time writer?
Philip Roth. Philip Roth, if I have to pick one writer all time. If I have to pick one book, the most perfect novel I think I've ever read is American Pastoral by Philip Roth. It's not even necessarily my favorite, but it's the most perfect novel I've ever read, and I highly recommend it.
There you go.
There we go.
That's about it, Barbara. I think we've run a little bit over time.
I think we probably had a wonderful magical hour with Harlan. I still think I'm looking across the Hudson of Manhattan. So
it is. That's Manhattan back there. There we go.
Next time I fly east, I will definitely spend some time in southern New Jersey. Years and years ago, when my first husband, who had finished his PhD, was interviewing, I do remember we went to interview with Exxon in New Jersey, but the whole thing has flashed out of my mind. So there we are. Anyway, Harlan, it's always a joy to talk to you.
Guys, always a lot of fun.
It really is. And next year, let's hope that, in fact, because March is like the month to come to Phoenix, that you will do that, and we will look forward to it. Meanwhile, Harlan very kindly actually signed our copies of.
Did.
So,
I went and signed a couple hundred for you. There it is. That's actual signature. As opposed to the book plates or whatever else I've done. So
no, you signed a couple hundred for us. In fact, there was a wonderful picture of you on Instagram, which I've used, and Harlan in front of us.
Signing those was when I was signing your books. It's exactly right.
It was great. So I want to thank you for taking the trouble to do that for your.
My pleasure. Always my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Much appreciated. So good night, Harlan. Enjoy the rest of your publication week.
Thank you. See you soon.
Take care.
Thank you all for joining us. Good night.